Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous supporters. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/donate. You're listening to Episode 8 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries both supernatural and natural, anything that's strange, odd, or makes you wonder, the claims and counterclaims from the perspectives of both faith and reason. And in this episode, we're talking about the Tunguska incident. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today, of course, is Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
So first, I want to just mention that we've got... Today, we're going to have at the end of the episode, so stick around, the mysterious headlines of the week. So you want to be sure to stick around for that.
As well as mysterious feedback from listeners?
Yes. Yeah. Do you have some feedback, Jimmy? Because
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So my notes are incomplete. So we're talking right now about the Tunguska incident. And Jimmy, what is the Tunguska incident?
Well, it's an event that occurred on June 30th in 1908, and it occurred over Siberia. Tunguska is a place in Siberia, and basically there was a huge explosion in the sky. Something happened. Something blew up in the sky. It was really big. We don't have an exact knowledge of the megatonnage that was involved, but it was multiple megatons of explosive force, and it flattened trees over a huge area in the Siberian forest. Fortunately, there are no known confirmed casualties. The population of Siberia was very low back then. It's still lower than elsewhere in Russia today. And even though there are claims that maybe a couple of people died during it, we really don't have confirmation of that. So it looks like hopefully nobody died, but some kind of huge catastrophic explosion took place in the sky and knocked down all kinds of trees.
So do we even know if there were any firsthand eyewitnesses? Has anyone ever said that they've heard or saw this incident?
My memory, I'd have to check, but my memory says that the shockwave went around the world and I think was picked up in various ways. But I am not familiar with anybody having been an eyewitness to it.
And when we
no, actually, maybe I do remember someone recalling there being a huge flash.
Okay.
But I'd have to check. And
when we say this was a big event, knocked down a lot of trees, this was like something like the square mileage. I mean, Siberia is a giant place, just to begin with. You could fit all the United States in it, I think. And the square mileage was like the state of Rhode Island or something. Like it was like a very large area that was affected by this.
Yeah. Incidentally, the shockwave knocked people out. There were eyewitnesses. The shockwave knocked people off their feet and broke windows hundreds of kilometers away.
Wow.
And if you look, there are photographs that were taken in 1927, which is almost 20 years later, and there's still all of these trees that were knocked down. You've got some new trees sprouting up, but you can still see all the trees that were knocked down.
Right. In the artwork for today's show, you'll see, I used one of these photos from 20 years later that shows the devastation still there. I found a reference that said it affected 770 square miles of forest. That is a truly massive area. Estimates of 80 million trees knocked over. That's a lot of land. So
yeah.
So what happened? What caused this massive explosion?
We don't know. There are a bunch of different examples that range from the mildly exotic to the extremely exotic. Obviously, something exotic happened here because massive explosions don't happen in the sky all the time. So something exotic happened here. It's just a question of how exotic. On kind of the low end of the spectrum is the idea that it was a meteoroid that a fairly sizable meteoroid that impacted the Earth's atmosphere and broke apart and had an airburst explosion. And this would account for why we haven't found an impact crater, at least a clearly identifiable impact crater. There is a candidate for an impact crater, but it's debated. Another possibility, and this was one that you would have heard Carl Sagan talk about if you watched his 1970s Cosmos series, his proposal was that it was a piece of a comet. Comets being made of lighter material than meteoroids. Meteoroids are like rock and metal, and comets are more dust and ice. That was his explanation for why we didn't have an impact crater, is because part of a comet impacted the atmosphere and shattered and blew apart the same way. And obviously we know meteors hit planets. That happens on Earth all the time. Mm-hmm. We saw a comet a few years ago hit Jupiter. We know that happens. In fact, it's theorized that it was massive comet impacts that gave Earth its oceans in the early solar system. Some scientists have proposed that. Another event that has been proposed that is a little more exotic, even though it's a little more terrestrial, is that it could have been a natural gas explosion.
Wow. That
there could have been underground natural gas that filtered up into the atmosphere, and then something like maybe lightning set it off. So that's one that we don't have as much experience. I mean, we've seen massive comet impacts, and we know from impact craters we've had massive meteor impacts, but we haven't seen massive natural gas explosions. So in a way, even though that's more terrestrial, it's also a little more exotic. Another similar proposal is that it was a volcanic event known as a Verne Shot. The Verne Shots are named after the early science fiction author Jules Verne, who wrote Journey to the Center of the Earth. And according to this theory, massive natural gas deposits can build up under the Earth's crust and then violently eject through a volcanic channel all at once. So that's been speculated as a cause. A little more exotic, one theory is a micro black hole impacted our planet, and that's what caused the explosion. Another exotic one is a little bit of antimatter impacted our atmosphere, because anytime matter and antimatter come into contact, they annihilate each other and release massive amounts of energy. So a small amount of antimatter could have, little antimatter meteor, maybe the size of a speck of sand or something, could have impacted our atmosphere. Wow. Then you get to sort of technological explanations. Obviously, we didn't have, if the atomic bomb had been invented at this point, it could have been an atomic bomb.
Right. But
we didn't have atomic bombs for another 40 years. In fact, the principles behind atomic bombs wouldn't even be discovered for another 30 years almost. But just because we don't have the technology to do this in 1908 doesn't mean nobody does. And so various people have proposed that it was a spaceship that blew up, or even a time ship or interdimensional ship of some kind that was responsible for the event.
Has there ever been a Doctor Who episode that dealt with the Tunguska incident?
Not an episode of the TV show that I recall. It may have been mentioned in passing. In Doctor Who, they do have the episode Earthshock, where the event that destroyed the dinosaurs turns out to have been a crashing spaceship from the future, which had on it Adric, the most hated Doctor Who companion of all time, except for Chameleon.
Yes.
By the way, speaking of Doctor Who, I meant to mention in last week's show on Watergate
Yeah.
There's a two-parter in Matt Smith's The 11th Doctor's Time where he visits Richard Nixon.
Oh, I remember that. Yes.
And and it's implied that the Watergate tapes are something Nixon undertakes because of something Doctor Who told him. It's like, you need records of all your conversations.
So, by the way, folks, if you're into Doctor Who, you have to listen to our Secrets of Doctor Who episode that Jimmy and I and Father Corey Stika do together, also on sqpn.com. Well, speaking of Tunguska, I mean, there's not to extend the fictional aspect of that too much, but
the X-Files are all over this.
Yes, that's what I was going to mention. Was the X-Files makes the alien spaceship explanation part of their mythology for what happened here. So there's a lot of all these explanations, from the, like you said, mildly exotic to the frankly fanciful. So what can we say about this? What do we know about this?
Well, we know there was a huge explosion over Siberia in June of 1908, and we have some estimates of the size of the explosion. Depending on whether it was, like, if it was a meteoroid or a comet, that would affect the size of the object, but it wouldn't affect that produced the explosion, but it wouldn't so much affect the size of the explosion itself. Estimates range from like 3 to 5 megatons on the low end to about 30 megatons of TNT on the high end. And to give you a scale of comparison, in the middle of that range, about 15 megatons, that would be 1,000 times the size of the atomic bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, in 1945. It's also about equal to the size of the Castle Bravo ground-based thermonuclear bomb from 1954. And it's actually less than, it's only about, this is all from, you can find all this on Wikipedia, it's only about a third of the largest atomic bomb explosion, which was the Tsar Bomba explosion that the Soviets did in 1961. But it's still really big. This is 1,000 Hiroshimas all at once.
Wow. Okay. And
if it's in the middle of the range.
And so, and what we also know is that there's no impact crater. Just we see the blast effects. Just do we know if it radiates out from a point? Is that what is?
There is a discernible blast pattern, and they've tried to use that to calculate where roughly this would have been. But because it's an object in motion and it's an airburst, it's kind of like a smear. Right. Rather than a specific point. Also, there is a proposed impact crater. It's a place called Lake Checo. And some researchers from the University of Bologna in 2007 proposed this lake as a possible impact crater that then filled up with water. However, more recent studies of like the lake deposits, the silt, or not silt, but the mud deposits at the bottom of the lake suggest that it's older than 2008. So there's debate about this.
Okay. So from the perspective of reason, how can we approach these mysteries, this mysterious event from the perspective of reason? What does reason say about it?
The simplest explanations are usually the ones that are the most probable. And so I would say that from a reason perspective, the meteoroid or comet explanations are the most probable. We understand those phenomena well. We know that similar things have happened in the past in the history of Earth and other planets in the solar system. It's just a matter of estimating the size of the object, and we have a fairly good way of doing that. In fact, these events are something that happen on various scales with known frequency. I mean, every day, meteors streak through our sky.
Right.
And most of those are, even though they look, when you see them, if you go out away from light pollution from the city and lay on the ground and wait 15 minutes for your eyes to dilate and then look up, you can see meteors on any given night, and they're like fast moving points of light that quickly burn out. But they're pretty bright. Well, really, those are like the size of a grain of sand or a small pebble coming apart as it streaks through the atmosphere and is being burned off by the atmosphere. That happens multiple times every single day. And then larger objects hit the Earth's atmosphere with varying degrees of frequency. The larger the object, the less frequent we get hit by that. The tiny ones we get hit by every single day. The bigger ones we get hit by more rarely. But it's been estimated that something like Tunguska, will happen every 100 years, every few hundred years. It's so even just the natural course of what we would expect to happen would lead to things like Tunguska. We don't have evidence. We don't have the same kind of history for the even more exotic explanations. While I can't rule any of them out in principle, we don't have evidence for a similar kind of natural gas explosion happening regularly, or a Verne Shot happening regularly. We don't have evidence of black holes impacting the Earth, even tiny ones like this. I mean, there may be very small subatomic black holes, but not ones big enough to cause this event. Antimatter is amazingly absent from nature in any sizable quantities. That's one of the big mysteries that CERN is trying to figure out, is where's all the antimatter that ought to be here. And similarly, we don't have reliable, there are claims, but we don't have a reliable history of being frequently impacted by spaceships or time ships or interdimensional ships the way we have a reliable history of being hit by meteoroids and comets.
So, in other words, what you're saying is it's not impossible for those things necessarily.
Not impossible.
But because, I'm trying to think of an analogy. If birds keep hitting your window every day, say, if something impacts your window tomorrow, it's likely to be a bird and not a spaceship.
Right, and birds have hit my windows before.
Right. So the likelihood is that it's something that we've experienced, as opposed to this unlikely event, even though it's technically possible.
Yeah, and there have been similar but smaller events since, even in Russia. Back in 2013, there was another event over Chelyabinsk in Russia where a meteoroid impacted our atmosphere and exploded, and it got caught on video.
Lots of videos.
And lots of video, and some people got injured. And it was another one where because it was airburst, there was no obvious impact crater from that. Incidentally, from that, I remember being at Mass the following Sunday, and in the Intentions of the Faithful, one of them was, "For the victims of the asteroid explosion in Russia, we pray to the Lord." And it's like, wow, you don't hear that all the time. I'm really living in the future here.
That is an interesting, that's not in the book.
Yeah.
So,
so probably it was an asteroid. We know there are future likely events of this same nature. In fact, NASA has a big detection program that's going on right now to detect near Earth objects, to try to find where they're going to intersect with our orbit and give us enough notice that we can potentially deflect these objects so that they don't impact us.
Right.
And that's led to a saying on some people's part that asteroids are just nature's way of saying, how's that space program going?
That was actually the Hollywood kind of lashed on that idea about 20 years ago with the Deep Impact
and Armageddon.
Armageddon, where the best idea was to send a bunch of miners to asteroid to blow it up.
There are actually better ideas.
There are better ideas. I mean, better to train some astronauts on how to do mining than to train miners to do astronauts. Anyway, that's That's for a different
also,
show.
you probably don't want to just blow it up, because just blowing it up doesn't change its course. So then you get hit by all the shrapnel.
Right, exactly. So they're trying to detect them. Is this a present danger for us? I mean, is there something coming our way that's...
Well, as the 2013 incident illustrated, some things get through the cracks,
Yep.
And people can even get hurt. Now, hopefully, we're aware of the biggest ones that would pose the greatest dangers, and it looks like we're not going to get hit by anything soon. But going out 100 years or more, it gets harder to predict.
Yep.
And there are still bodies that they are still finding. They'll every so often, every few weeks, it seems, or certainly every few months, you hear about some new object that whizzed past the Earth and they didn't even see it until after it had gone by.
I think this is something that people really need, it's hard to kind of grasp, is that space is big, and it's really hard for people on Earth to, we're not monitoring every inch of the space around Earth, even inside the orbit of the moon, never mind the whole solar system. I think science fiction has kind of given us a oversimplified idea of how easy it is to see things in the space around Earth. I mean, it's hard enough to find a particular satellite in low Earth orbit, never mind some object coming at it.
Yeah. And some people, because they haven't experienced something like this event, they kind of poo-poo the asteroid detection and deflection efforts. And it's like, oh, we don't need that. That's a waste of money. It's like, no, dude, these things happen.
Right.
We owe our existence to one of these things happening to the dinosaurs. This happened in 1908 over Siberia.
Right.
If the next one happens over New York City, you will take this much more seriously.
Right.
Let's make sure the next one does not happen over. Let's avoid having a next one of this size, because it would be absolutely devastating if it happened over a populated area.
In fact, those movies we talked about probably actually helped a bit in order to bring home to people what it would be like to have something of this nature happen to us. Through the Hollywood special effects showing us, and speaking of it happens,
I prefer the solution in the Stargate SG-1 episode where they were able to phase the asteroid through the Earth so it didn't actually impact.
Yes, that was a very good solution.
Much happier.
So, and Jimmy, when you say these things happen because you've been to impact craters around, various impact craters.
Yeah, I have kind of a little project. So far, I've really only been to 2, but I have kind of a project of I'd like to visit as many impact craters as I can. One that I went to is in Arizona. There's a famous site in northern Arizona. It's near the Painted Desert in the Petrified Forest, and it's called Meteor Crater, and it's massive. Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievably huge. It's from a meteor that hit within 50,000 years or so, which is within, human history, not recorded history, but within human history. And so it's absolutely stunning. On good days, they will allow you to walk along the edge of it on a designated tourist path with like a tour. But on bad days, they don't allow that because the wind is strong enough. It might lift you up and blow you into the crater.
And this crater is deep. I mean, that would be a deadly event.
It would deadly. It would be. It's a huge, huge crater. It's just dwarfs. It's hard to describe how big it is.
Yeah. You look for pictures online. Yeah.
Hundreds of feet deep, and I don't know, something like a mile across or something. And if you've ever seen the movie Starman, back from the 80s, that was filmed in Meteor Crater.
So it's 3/4 of a mile across and 560 feet deep, which is quite a lot.
Yeah, you can get vertigo looking into the thing. Oof. It's not as deep as the Grand Canyon, which is also in northern Arizona. But by the way, northern Arizona is awesome. Go visit it. However, it's really impressive. Also in West Texas, there's another smaller meteor impact crater near Odessa. And I've been there too and walked around in that one. It's not near so deep, so you can get down in it easily. I even have a piece of that meteor because they sell them, and so I bought a little tiny chunk of that meteor. And it dates to about the same time as Meteor Crater in Arizona. And so I haven't ever checked this out, but personally, I wonder if they were like parts of the same original body, and it was disintegrating as it came into Earth's atmosphere, and part of it hit in Texas and part of it hit in Arizona.
Interesting. That's an interesting theory. Okay.
So having been to these places, I take this a little more seriously because I've seen what happens as a result.
Yes. So that's the recent perspective. What do we know from a faith perspective about, or what can we say about this from a faith perspective?
Well, obviously, it's part of God's providence to allow the universe to play out this way. And that's something the Catechism of the Catholic Church talks about, that as long that God created the world in a state of journeying, and as long as it hasn't reached its final form, he allows these creative and destructive forces to play out and interact with each other. And so that's something that is part of God's overall plan. It incorporates events like this. And we can be thankful that in this case, it looks like nobody got killed, or if they did, very few people got killed. We can be thankful that God allowed a similar but even bigger event, it looks like, to happen 60 million years ago, which opened the way for our mammalian ancestors to replace the dinosaurs. That was part of God's plan.
Yep.
We can be thankful that God has given us the ability to detect and hopefully even deflect such events from happening in the future. And we can be extremely thankful that that he didn't allow this to happen between 1948 and 1991, because that was the Cold War. And if there had been a Tunguska-like event over the Soviet Union or America during the Cold War, it would have been interpreted as a nuclear attack, and that would have set off World War III.
Right.
And by God's providence, that did not happen. We came very close to other things setting off World War III, including a flock of geese was once mistaken by the Soviets for an incoming nuclear attack. And Mikhail Gorbachev actually kept a statue of a goose in his office in the Kremlin as a reminder that even something as simple as geese could be mistaken for a nuclear attack.
Right. I remember one story about sunlight glinting off of clouds set off the nuclear detection system, the Soviet one.
It looked like a nuclear flash.
And there should have been an automatic, we should launch, but this one colonel in the Soviet rocket forces disobeyed orders and said, no, we need to verify. And that prevented World War III. So, yes, we thank God for him.
Yeah, and there were multiple incidents like that. There was another during the Cuban Missile Crisis where one officer on a sub who had one of 3 votes, it had to be unanimous, one officer voted no, and they didn't launch. So we came very close to nuclear war on multiple occasions, and so we can thank God that we didn't have a Tunguska-like event during the Cold War, because it would have been horrible.
Yes. So what's our bottom line on the mystery of the Tunguska event?
The bottom line is that the Tunguska event was probably a natural event, like a meteoroid or a comet. And it's also a dramatic reminder of the powerful forces that exist in nature and of our own smallness. But also, with the detection and deflection efforts coming online, also of our own greatness as God's creatures.
Very good. So, folks, we'll put links to some resources, some articles, and other things. And I'm actually I'll also put a link to the meteor crater in Arizona article on Wikipedia for you to show you a little bit about that crater there too. So, so that's the Tunguska event. So let's go to some of our mysterious feedback on our previous shows. On our episode on transhumanism, we had a comment from Max Mezel on Twitter, who informs us the X-Men, we discussed the X-Men, as part of transhumanism. And he said the X-Men aren't transhuman. They went through some extra evolutionary super puberty a la the Atomic Age. But Captain America is more like transhumans. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So I guess I think Max is quite correct about the X-Men. I wouldn't say the X-Men are transhumanists. They are, or arguably are, transhumans in that they're a new human subspecies that, in the eyes of some mutants in the Marvel universe, should replace mankind.
Right.
So I would say some of them have transhumanist intentions, especially maybe in the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Yes, they really call themselves that. It was the 60s. But they themselves aren't trying to engineer a new human race. They're not trying to use technological or medical ways of augmenting ordinary humans to produce a new human race. It's just kind of happening.
Right.
Captain America is interesting because he, back during World War II, took what was called the super soldier serum to produce an upgraded soldier. And that does look a little more like transhumanism in one way, in that he is an upgraded human. But I don't think there were ultimately transhumanist intentions behind the super soldier program. It was more like an expedient to help us win World War II, not an attempt to fundamentally replace the current human race.
Okay, very good. Now, our next feedback is on our first episode that was on ghosts. Carolyn Lally on YouTube. She said, "Hi, Jimmy. Big fan of Catholic Answers in your podcast. I particularly appreciate the detailed historic perspective in your responses. Insofar as this topic of ghosts, I've had 3 encounters with spirits, none of which were good."
Wow.
Yeah. That's, well, I mean, if I ever experienced a ghostly event, even a sort of neutral ghostly event, I'm not sure I would characterize it as good myself. I would be super creeped out. So, thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. And then our third piece of feedback also on YouTube from Stat Crux Dum Volvitor Orbis. My Latin is terrible.
Prodigious name.
Yes, I'm not sure. It's something about a cross and an orb, but But they say in their comment, "I saw a purple orb last year. Most bizarre thing I've ever seen. It was almost electrical, about the size of a bowling ball. It hovered over my bed and then suddenly disappeared. It wasn't ball lightning or St. Elmo's fire. Really strange. My mom experienced poltergeist in the 1960s. It was witnessed by 2 others on separate nights. My mom was a science graduate, so very rational. She also didn't like to talk about it as it disturbed her." Wow. That's really creepy. I do not. That's the other thing, is I do not want to wake up and find a hovering ball of purpleness or over my bed. That's just. Yeah, I'd rather just sleep through that.
Yeah, I would both want to touch it and then be afraid it would shock me.
Exactly. I would nudge my wife, "Melanie, do you see that?" So that's our feedback for this week. And
thank you for the feedback. Keep it coming.
Yes, we love your feedback. And if you want to send audio feedback, a recording of your voice, you could record it on your phone using the voice memo and then attach it to an email and send it to us at mysterious@sqpn.com. We would love to play your feedback on the recording, on the podcast. And then finally, mysterious headlines. Jimmy, what mysterious headlines do we have this week?
So we have 3 mysterious headlines, and links to all of them will be in the show notes. One of them, in continuing Bigfoot news, the town of Marion, North Carolina, has named Bigfoot its official animal.
Excellent.
So it's good to know they have an official animal now and that it's Bigfoot. Also, we recently, in ongoing Egypt news, we recently discovered that Egyptians have been making mummies for longer than we knew. Recently, a mummy was dated to 3600 BC, which was 500 years before Egypt was even a united country. And some evidence points to the Egyptians deliberately mummifying people, not just because corpses would dry out in the sand,
yes,
but deliberately mummifying people as early as 4300 BC, which would be 6,300 years ago.
Wow. And again, put that in perspective, all of human civilization fits within about a 10,000 year period. So that's pretty far back.
All of recorded history.
Yes, recorded human civilization.
Lastly, there's an article from Real Clear Science on top 6 dinosaur myths. And so if you want to find out what some myths you may have heard about dinosaurs are, be sure and check that out. One of them they cover is the fact that dinosaurs, unlike the pictures in the books I grew up with, they were not all gray, green, and brown. They came in a variety of different colors, some of which were very bright, the same way birds and so forth use bright colors to attract mates and intimidate prey and things like that.
Yeah, I love how over the years the Jurassic motion pictures, the Jurassic movies, have reflected the things we've come to learn about dinosaurs and the way they look and act.
And lately we've found pigments in some fossil remains that have allowed us to reconstruct color patterns.
Yes, excellent. So, folks, I want to again ask you to please like, comment, subscribe, get notifications, and share our podcast. Help spread the news about this podcast. So a lot of people said they liked it, so help us to get it out to more people. And so otherwise, that's it for us from about the Tunguska incident. What do you think of the Tunguska event? What do you think of our discussion of it, and what do you think really happened? So again, like I said, go to sqpn.com or the SQPN Facebook page, leave a comment there on this particular show, or send us an email to mysterious@sqpn.com. We'll put all the links to the show and the resources on our website, in our show notes, as well as links to our social media. And so until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.